I was sitting in my home office in Phoenix, Arizona, going through my emails on a Tuesday afternoon when I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of my tenants, a young couple renting my townhouse in the Sunridge Heights development, had forwarded me a letter from someone claiming to be with the Homeowners Association. The letter demanded payment of $300 for what they called a mandatory tenant occupancy fee that was supposedly due within 10 days or face penalties. My hands trembled slightly as I read through the document. I had owned that townhouse for 8 years, and I had been renting it out for the past 4. Never once had anyone mentioned anything about tenant fees to the HOA. I paid my regular HOA dues religiously every quarter, always on time, never missed a payment. This made absolutely no sense. I picked up my phone and called Marcus, my tenant. He answered on the third ring, sounding worried. "Hey, Ethan," he said. "Did you get my email?" "Just reading it now," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm even though I was furious. "How did you receive this letter?" "It was in our mailbox yesterday. My wife Rebecca found it when she got home from work. We were not sure what to do, so we figured we should send it to you first before paying anything." "You did exactly the right thing," I told him firmly. "Do not pay them a single cent. I never authorized anyone to collect fees from you. Your rent comes to me, and that is it. This is completely unauthorized." Marcus let out a relieved breath. "Okay, good. We were confused because we have been living here for 2 years and never heard about this before." The letter made it sound official, though, and they threatened us with fines if we did not pay. That last part really got my attention. "What kind of fines?" It said failure to pay would result in daily fines of $50 until the balance was settled, plus potential legal action. I felt my jaw clench. "Forward me any other correspondence you get from them. Do not respond, do not pay anything. I am going to handle this personally." After hanging up with Marcus, I immediately called my other tenant, a retired teacher named Sandra who rented my second property in the same development. She confirmed that she had received an identical letter 3 days ago, but had not mentioned it to me yet because she was trying to figure out if it was legitimate. "I almost paid it," Sandra admitted. "The letterhead looked official, and I did not want to cause you any trouble with the HOA." "Sandra, you would never cause me trouble by checking with me first. That is exactly what you should do. Do not pay this. Something very wrong is going on here." I spent the next hour digging through my files, pulling out every piece of HOA documentation I had. I reviewed the CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the community. I went through the bylaws, the meeting minutes I had received over the years, and every financial statement. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere, was there any mention of tenant fees, occupancy fees, or any special assessment related to renters. The Sunridge Heights HOA was managed by a board of 5 residents. I knew them all by face if not by name, though I had not been particularly active in HOA affairs since I had moved out of my unit there, and into a house I had purchased in Scottsdale. The president of the board was a woman named Brenda Patterson, and I remembered her as being particularly vocal at the few meetings I had attended before moving. I decided to go directly to the source. The next morning, I drove to the community clubhouse where the HOA held their offices. It was a modest building near the pool, painted in the same beige and terracotta colors as the rest of the development. A woman I did not recognize sat at the front desk. She looked to be in her early 20s, probably a part-time administrative assistant. "Can I help you?" she asked with a pleasant smile. "I am here to see Brenda Patterson. My name is Ethan Crawford. I own 2 properties here in the development. Do you have an appointment?" No, but this is urgent. It concerns unauthorized fee collection. The young woman's smile faltered slightly. Let me see if she is available. She picked up the phone and spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up and gestured toward a hallway. Second door on the right. Brenda Patterson's office was small but neatly organized. She sat behind a desk cluttered with paperwork. A woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed suburban authority. She wore a cream-colored blazer and had reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Mr. Crawford," she said, not standing up or offering her hand. "What can I do for you?" I pulled out the letter that Marcus had forwarded me and placed it on her desk. "I would like to know why the HOA is collecting fees from my tenants without my knowledge or authorization." Brenda picked up the letter and glanced at it, barely spending 5 seconds looking at it before setting it back down. "That is a legitimate assessment approved by the board." "Really?" "Because I have gone through every document I have received from this HOA for the past 8 years, and I have never seen any mention of tenant fees." "It was approved at the January meeting," she said matter-of-factly. "Then why was I not notified? I am the property owner. Any fees or assessments should come to me, not to my tenants." Brenda leaned back in her chair, and I saw something in her expression that I did not like. It was a mixture of smugness and irritation. "The board determined that since tenants are the ones occupying the properties and using the amenities, they should be responsible for the occupancy fee." "That is not how HOAs work," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am the member of this HOA, not my tenants. They have no contractual relationship with you. If there is a legitimate fee, it comes to me, and I decide whether to pass it on to them or absorb it myself." "Well, that is not how we are doing it now," Brenda said with a shrug. I felt my temperature rising. "Did you even check with a lawyer before implementing this? Because I am pretty sure what you are doing is illegal." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening legal action, Mr. Crawford?" "I am asking if you consulted with legal counsel before you started demanding money from people who are not even members of this HOA. The board has full authority to implement fees as we see fit. The board has authority over its members. My tenants are not members." Brenda stood up, clearly done with the conversation. "If you have an issue with the board's decision, you can file a formal complaint and present it at next month's meeting. Until then, the fee stands. Your tenants need to pay it." "My tenants are not paying anything," I said firmly. "And neither am I until I see documentation showing this was properly approved and is actually legal. Then they will be subject to fines." "Try it," I said, "and you will be hearing from my attorney." I left the office feeling more angry than when I had arrived. Brenda's attitude had been completely dismissive, and something about the whole situation felt wrong beyond just the unauthorized fee collection. Back in my car, I sat for a few minutes trying to calm down and think through my next steps. I called my real estate attorney, David Harrison, and explained the situation. He listened carefully, asking a few clarifying questions. "That is definitely not standard," David said. "HOA boards cannot just arbitrarily charge non-members. The tenants have no privity of contract with the HOA. Any fees or assessments need to go through you as the property owner." "That is what I thought. Send me copies of everything you have. The letter they sent to your tenants, your HOA governing documents, any meeting minutes or notices you received. I will review it and send them a letter." "What do you think is really going on here?" I asked. David was quiet for a moment. "Hard to say without seeing everything. But if I had to guess, either someone on the board does not understand how HOAs actually work, or there is something more deliberate happening." How many rental properties are in your development? I thought about it. I am not sure exactly, maybe 20 or 30 out of about 200 units, so not a huge percentage. Have you talked to any other landlords? Not yet. Do that. See if they received the same letters for their tenants. If this is widespread, we might be looking at something bigger. After hanging up with David, I started making calls. I did not personally know all the other landlords in Sunridge Heights, but I knew a few and they knew others. By the end of the day, I had spoken with 6 different property owners, and 4 of them confirmed their tenants had received identical letters. One of them, a guy named Robert who owned 3 units in the development, told me something interesting. My tenant actually paid it already, Robert said. She did not think to check with me first. I only found out when she mentioned it in passing last week. Did you get a receipt or any documentation? Let me ask her and get back to you. An hour later, Robert sent me a photo of the receipt his tenant had received. The check had been made out to something called Sunridge Community Management Services, and the receipt was signed by Brenda Patterson. I immediately called David back and sent him the photo. That is interesting, David said. Sunridge Community Management Services. Is that the HOA's official name? No. The HOA is just called Sunridge Heights Homeowners Association. I have never heard of this management company. Let me do some digging. While David researched, I decided to dig into the HOA's finances myself. As a property owner and HOA member, I had the right to inspect the association's financial records. I sent a formal written request to the HOA board, citing the specific statute in Arizona law that guaranteed my access. Brenda responded 2 days later with an email saying I could review the records, but only during business hours at the clubhouse and only with 24 hours advance notice. It was clearly meant to be obstructive, but I played along. I scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. In the meantime, David got back to me with some troubling information. I ran a business entity search through the Arizona Corporation Commission, he said. Sunridge Community Management Services was registered 6 months ago. Want to guess who is listed as the statutory agent? Brenda Patterson. Bingo. She also listed herself as the company's president and CEO. My stomach dropped. So she created a private company and is using her position as HOA president to funnel money into it. That is what it looks like. But we need more evidence. When you go review those financial records, photograph everything. We need to see where the HOA's money is actually going, and whether there is any documentation showing this tenant fee program was legitimately approved. Tuesday morning came, and I showed up at the clubhouse with my phone fully charged and ready to document everything. The same young assistant from before led me to a small conference room where 3 bankers' boxes full of files were waiting. You have 2 hours, she said. Nothing leaves this room. I spent those 2 hours methodically going through every document. The HOA's finances were a mess. Bank statements showed regular deposits from homeowners paying their quarterly dues, but there were also irregular withdrawals to various vendors, many of which seemed questionable. Multiple payments to Sunridge Community Management Services for vague services like community oversight and tenant management. Most damning, I found meeting minutes from the January board meeting Brenda had mentioned. The minutes showed that a motion had been made to explore additional revenue streams, but there was no specific mention of tenant fees. The motion had passed 3-2, with 2 board members voting against it. But nowhere in any subsequent meeting minutes was there documentation of an actual vote to implement the tenant occupancy fee program. I photographed everything I could, trying to be discreet but thorough. Near the bottom of the third box, I found something that made my blood boil. It was a spreadsheet, handwritten, listing rental properties in the development along with tenant names and amounts collected. According to this spreadsheet, the HOA, or rather, Brenda's company, had collected over $15,000 in these bogus fees over the past 3 months. When my 2 hours were up, I thanked the assistant and left, immediately calling David from my car. "This is fraud," David said after I explained what I had found. "Clear cut. She is using her position as HOA president to extort money from tenants and funnel it into her private company." "What do? We need to alert the other board members first. They might not even know what she is doing. Then we go to the homeowners. If Brenda does not resign and make this right voluntarily, we get law enforcement involved." David drafted a letter outlining everything we had discovered and sent it to the 4 other board members, copying me. Within 24 hours, I got a phone call from one of them, a man named Greg Rodriguez. "Mr. Crawford, this is Greg Rodriguez. I am the vice president of the HOA board. I just received your attorney's letter." "And?" I asked cautiously. "And I am absolutely horrified. I had no idea Brenda was doing this. None of us did. The January meeting minutes mentioned exploring additional revenue streams." "Right. We talked about maybe increasing dues slightly or finding ways to cut costs. But Brenda said she would handle it and get back to us. She never mentioned anything about charging tenants or creating a separate company." "Do you have access to the HOA's bank accounts?" "No, only Brenda does. She is the treasurer as well as the president. We get quarterly financial reports, but they are always pretty vague. I just assumed she was handling things properly." I could hear the genuine distress in Greg's voice, and I believed him. "What are you going to do?" "I am calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. Can you be there?" "Absolutely." The emergency meeting was held in the clubhouse community room. All 5 board members were present, along with me, David Harrison, and about a dozen other homeowners who had gotten wind that something serious was happening. The tension in the room was palpable. Brenda sat at the head of the table, looking defiant. She had brought her own attorney, a weaselly-looking guy in an expensive suit who kept whispering in her ear. Greg Rodriguez called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. "We are here tonight because serious allegations have been made regarding unauthorized fee collection and potential financial impropriety. Mr. Crawford and his attorney have presented evidence that suggests the board president has been collecting fees from tenants without proper board approval and depositing those funds into a private company rather than the HOA's accounts." Brenda's attorney stood up. "My client denies any wrongdoing. All actions taken were within her authority as board president." David stood as well. "Then, perhaps Miss Patterson can explain why she created a private company 6 months ago and has been directing payments to that company instead of the HOA. Perhaps she can show us the board resolution authorizing this tenant fee program. Perhaps she can explain why she has been threatening non-HOA members with fines and legal action." "The board gave me authority to explore additional revenue," Brenda said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was sharp and defensive. "That is exactly what I did." "You explored it into your personal bank account," I said, unable to stay quiet, her face flushed red. "That money is for administrative services. Managing tenants requires additional work." "Work that the HOA already has the authority to do if needed," David countered. "Work that you should have been doing as part of your duties as board president. Instead, you created a scheme to extort money from tenants and enrich yourself." "I did not extort anyone," Brenda shouted, standing up suddenly. Those tenants are using our facilities, our pool, our clubhouse. They should pay for it. Then the board should have voted on a legitimate assessment that would be charged to the property owners, Greg said firmly, not to the tenants directly. You know that, Brenda. You have been on this board for 6 years. Another board member, a woman named Patricia, spoke up. I want to see all the bank statements for this management company. I want to know exactly how much money was collected and where it went. Brenda's attorney leaned over and whispered urgently in her ear. She shook her head at him, then looked around the room with an expression that was equal parts anger and fear. I do not have to justify myself to any of you, she said. I resign from this board effective immediately. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. David stepped into her path. Resigning does not make the crime go away, Miss Patterson. You need to return the money you collected. Get out of my way or I will call the police. That is an excellent idea, David said calmly. Please do call them. I think they would be very interested in hearing about your activities. Brenda's attorney grabbed her arm and pulled her back. They had a heated, whispered conversation in the corner for about 2 minutes while everyone else in the room watched in stunned silence. Finally, the attorney turned to address us. My client is willing to return all collected funds to the affected tenants in exchange for no criminal charges being filed. That is not how this works, David said. But if she returns all the money by the end of the week and provides full accounting of everything she collected, Mr. Crawford might be willing to accept that as restitution before deciding whether to pursue charges. I nodded my agreement, though honestly I was not sure yet what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to see Brenda prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but another part of me just wanted this nightmare resolved so my tenants could live in peace. Fine, Brenda spat. I will return the money, but I am done with this board and this community. You are all ungrateful. She actually said that. Ungrateful. As if she had done us some kind of favor by stealing from us. After Brenda and her attorney left, the remaining board members voted unanimously to terminate her access to all HOA accounts and to begin a full financial audit. They also voted to send a letter to every household in the community explaining what had happened and assuring everyone that the tenant fee program was completely unauthorized and invalid. Over the next week, I coordinated with the other affected landlords to ensure all of our tenants received refunds. Brenda's attorney sent checks to each tenant who had paid, totaling just over $15,000 as the spreadsheet had indicated. My tenant Marcus got his $300 back, as did Robert's tenant and the others. But I was not satisfied. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Brenda had committed wire fraud, possibly mail fraud, and definitely theft. The fact that she had returned the money did not change that she had committed crimes. I talked it over with David, and we agreed to report the matter to the Phoenix Police Department's White-Collar Crimes Unit. I also filed a complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office. The investigation took about 6 weeks. During that time, I learned that Brenda had actually done this same thing at a previous HOA where she had lived before moving to Sunridge Heights. That HOA had never reported her because she had resigned and moved away before they discovered the extent of her activities. If they had reported her then, my situation never would have happened. The police detective assigned to the case, a thorough woman named Detective Sarah Wu, built a solid case against Brenda. The evidence was overwhelming. The fake company, the unauthorized letters threatening legal action, the deposit records showing money going into accounts she controlled. It was textbook fraud. Brenda Patterson was arrested on a Thursday morning in late May. I was not there to see it, but Robert called me right after it happened because he lived 3 houses down from her. You should have seen her face, Robert said. She was in her bathrobe watering her plants when two detectives showed up with a warrant. She tried to go back inside, but they stopped her. Her husband came out looking completely confused. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that she was being held accountable, but sadness that it had come to this at all. If she had just done her job properly, none of this would have happened. The case moved through the system relatively quickly. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she should get probation since she had returned the money, but the prosecutor pointed out that she had only returned it when she got caught, and that she had a pattern of this behavior. The judge agreed. In August, Brenda Patterson pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation after that, and ordered to pay restitution not just to the tenants she had scammed but also to the HOA itself for the cost of the audit and legal fees. The judge also ordered her to perform 500 hours of community service after her release. The day of sentencing, I sat in the courtroom with several other homeowners from Sunridge Heights. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up and walked to the podium. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "What Miss Patterson did was not just about money. She abused a position of trust. She made my tenants feel unsafe in their own homes. She created stress and fear for dozens of people just so she could line her pockets. HOAs are supposed to maintain communities and resolve problems, not create them. Miss Patterson betrayed everyone who trusted her with that responsibility." Brenda did not look at me during my statement. She stared straight ahead, her face blank. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with David and took a deep breath of the hot Arizona air. It was over, finally over, but the story does not quite end there. The Sunridge Heights HOA underwent massive reforms in the aftermath of the scandal. Greg Rodriguez became the new president, and he implemented new policies requiring multiple board members to have oversight of finances. No one person could control the bank accounts anymore. The board also hired a professional property management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the temptation for any individual board member to overstep their authority. More importantly, the board reached out to all the landlords in the community and worked with us to create clear guidelines about communication. If there were ever any issues involving rental properties, the board would contact the property owner first, not the tenant. This was how it should have been done from the beginning. My tenants, Marcus and Rebecca, stayed in my townhouse for another 3 years before buying their own home in a different part of Phoenix. Before they moved out, Marcus told me that despite everything that had happened, they had really enjoyed living in Sunridge Heights. Once that whole mess got resolved, it turned out to be a great community, Marcus said. The new board is actually functional, and people look out for each other. "You should come to the pool parties sometime," I laughed. "Maybe I will." Sandra, my other tenant, still lives in my second property at Sunridge Heights to this day. She is friends with half the neighborhood now and serves on the social committee. She sends me quarterly updates about community events, always with photos of the beautiful Arizona sunsets from her back patio. As for Brenda Patterson, I honestly do not know what happened to her after prison. I heard through the grapevine that she and her husband divorced while she was serving her sentence, and that she moved out of state after her release. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I do not spend much time thinking about her anymore. The whole situation taught me several important lessons. First, never assume that people in positions of authority are acting properly just because they hold those positions. Trust but verify. Second, documentation is everything. If I had not kept meticulous records of all my HOA documents, if I had not photographed those financial files, building a case would have been much harder. Third, standing up for what is right is worth the time and effort, even when it is frustrating and exhausting. I also learned that most people are fundamentally good and want to do the right thing. The other board members at Sunridge Heights were genuinely horrified when they learned what Brenda had been doing. They worked hard to make things right and to rebuild trust in the community. The other landlords I connected with during this ordeal were all reasonable people who just wanted fair treatment. Even Brenda's young assistant at the clubhouse, who quit shortly after the scandal broke, sent me an email apologizing for not realizing something was wrong. "I was just trying to do my job," she wrote. "I should have asked more questions when Miss Patterson told me to file those letters to the tenants. I should have thought about whether it made sense. I am really sorry." I wrote back telling her that she bore no responsibility for Brenda's actions and encouraging her to trust her instincts in the future. She had no way of knowing her boss was running a scam. In the years since the incident, I have become much more active in HOA affairs, not just at Sunridge Heights but in the broader community. I joined a local landlord association and started attending their monthly meetings. I learned that HOA abuse and mismanagement is unfortunately far more common than I had realized. Stories similar to mine, though not always involving outright fraud, happen regularly. One landlord I met through the association told me about an HOA that tried to ban all rentals in their community, even though that violated their own governing documents. Another described an HOA that assessed her property $10,000 for a special assessment to repave roads that had already been paid for through regular dues. It took her 2 years and substantial legal fees to prove the double billing and get her money back. These experiences motivated me to advocate for stronger oversight of HOAs at the state level. I testified before a legislative committee considering reforms to Arizona's HOA laws. While the reforms that eventually passed were not as comprehensive as I would have liked, they did include provisions requiring more financial transparency and making it easier for homeowners to access records. I also started writing articles for a local real estate blog about HOA issues, sharing what I had learned and offering advice to other property owners and homeowners. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out with their own stories of HOA problems, asking for guidance. I could not help everyone individually, but I tried to point people toward resources and encourage them to stand up for their rights. My relationship with my tenants improved dramatically after the incident as well. Before all this happened, I had been a fairly hands-off landlord. I collected rent, handled maintenance issues when they arose, and otherwise stayed out of my tenants' way. But going through this experience together created a bond. My tenants saw that I would go to bat for them when they were treated unfairly, and I saw that they were trustworthy people who respected my property and tried to do the right thing. I started being more proactive about communication, checking in regularly even when there were no problems. I made sure they knew they could call me anytime if something seemed off or if they had concerns. This investment in the relationship paid dividends. My properties have had virtually no vacancy periods in the years since, and my tenants take excellent care of the units because they feel valued and respected. The incident also affected how I evaluate investment properties. I used to focus primarily on location, price, and potential rental income. Now, I thoroughly investigate any HOA before purchasing a property in a managed community. I attend HOA meetings, talk to board members and residents, and review financial records carefully. If anything seems off, or if the board seems dysfunctional, I walk away no matter how good the property looks on paper. This caution has saved me from several potential disasters. I almost purchased a condo in Temp that seemed like a great deal until I attended an HOA meeting and witnessed the board president screaming at homeowners who asked questions. I walked away from that deal immediately. A few months later, I heard that HOA was embroiled in multiple lawsuits over mismanagement and undisclosed structural problems with the building. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wonder what would have occurred if Marcus had just paid that initial $300 fee without telling me. Brenda would have continued her scheme, collecting thousands more dollars from tenants who did not know any better. She might have expanded her operation or come up with new ways to skim money from the community. How long would it have gone on before someone finally caught her? But Marcus did tell me, and I did investigate, and Brenda was held accountable. That makes me believe that most people, when given the information they need, will make the right choice. The system worked eventually, even though it should not have been necessary in the first place. I also think about Brenda sometimes and wonder what drove her to do what she did. She was not some criminal mastermind. She was a middle-aged suburban woman who probably started with good intentions when she joined the HOA board. At what point did she decide to cross the line? Was it gradual, starting with small justified expenses that slowly morphed into outright theft? Or was it calculated from the beginning? I will never know the answer to those questions, and maybe it does not matter. What matters is that the system has checks and balances for a reason, and when those checks are ignored or bypassed, bad things happen. The Sunridge Heights community is thriving now. Property values have remained stable, and the HOA actually functions the way it is supposed to, maintaining common areas and resolving disputes fairly. The pool got renovated last year using funds from a properly approved and transparent special assessment. The landscaping looks beautiful. New families move in regularly, and the sense of community is strong. I drove through the neighborhood just last week to check on my properties, and stopped by the clubhouse to say hello to the current board members. They were planning a 4th of July celebration, and asked if I wanted to sponsor the fireworks display. I agreed and wrote them a check on the spot, made out properly to Sunridge Heights Homeowners Association, with a memo line clearly stating, July 4th fireworks donation. As I drove away from Sunridge Heights that evening, watching the sun set over the perfectly maintained streets and well-kept homes, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not just because I had helped expose corruption and protect my tenants, but because I had learned to be a better landlord, a better community member, and a better advocate for what was right. The experience with Brenda Patterson and her fraudulent fee scheme was frustrating, infuriating, and exhausting. It cost me time, money, and considerable stress. But it also taught me valuable lessons and connected me with good people who shared my values. It showed me that standing up to wrongdoing matters and that most people will support you when you take that stand. My advice to anyone dealing with a similar situation is simple. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do not be afraid to ask questions, demand documentation, and push back against authority when that authority is being abused. Keep meticulous records. Find allies who share your concerns, and do not give up just because the process is difficult or uncomfortable. HOAs serve an important function in many communities, maintaining property values and common spaces that benefit everyone. But like any organization with power and money, they need oversight and accountability. As homeowners and property owners, It is our responsibility to provide that oversight, even when it is inconvenient. The young assistant who worked at the clubhouse during the scandal ended up going to law school. She sent me an announcement when she graduated and told me that witnessing what happened with Brenda had inspired her to focus on property law and HOA regulation. She now works for a firm that represents homeowners in disputes with their associations. I like to think that some good came from that entire mess, that maybe her career will help prevent other people from experiencing what we went through. My properties at Sunridge Heights continue to be solid investments. The rental income is stable, maintenance costs are reasonable, and the HOA functions properly under new leadership. I have even purchased a third property in the community, a small single-family home that I rent to a young family with 2 kids. They love the neighborhood, especially the pool and the community events. Sandra still invites me to those community events, and I actually attend occasionally now. Last summer I went to the pool party she mentioned, and it was nice. I met my neighbors, ate decent barbecue, and watched kids play in the water while adults stood around chatting about normal things like jobs and vacations, and the best places to get tacos in Phoenix. No one mentioned HOA scandals or fraudulent fees. That chapter was closed, a cautionary tale that people occasionally reference but no longer dominated conversation. Life had moved on as it should, but I have not forgotten, and I never will. Every quarter when I pay my HOA dues, I make sure to review the financial statements that accompany the bill. Every year I attend at least one board meeting just to stay informed about what is happening. And whenever I hear about a tenant receiving any communication from the HOA, I investigate immediately. Some might call that paranoid, but I call it prudent. The price of a functional community is eternal vigilance, or something like that. Benjamin Franklin said it about liberty, but it applies to HOAs too. My real estate attorney, David Harrison, and I still grab lunch occasionally. He has become something of a friend over the years, though our relationship started purely professional. At our most recent lunch, he told me about another case he was working on involving HOA misconduct, this time embezzlement by a board treasurer. "It is like your case," David said, "but this guy was smarter about hiding it. Took us months to unravel all the fake invoices and shell companies he created." "Did they catch him?" I asked. "Oh yeah. He is looking at serious prison time. The HOA is suing him personally to recover the money, and his wife filed for divorce. Total disaster." I shook my head. Why do people think they can get away with this stuff? Same reason anyone commits white-collar crime, David said. They think they are smarter than everyone else, and they convince themselves they deserve the money for all their hard work. It is a rationalization, but it is a powerful one. Well, I am glad people like you are out there to stop them. David raised his iced tea in a mock toast. And I am glad people like you are willing to fight when you see something wrong. A lot of people would have just paid that fee to avoid the hassle. Maybe, I admitted. But it was not about the $300. It was about the principle. Principles matter, David agreed. As I sit here now, writing this all down in my home office in Scottsdale, I can see my investment properties information organized neatly in folders on my bookshelf. Each folder contains all the documentation I need: leases, inspection reports, maintenance records, HOA documents. I keep everything organized and accessible because I learned the hard way that you never know when you might need it. The folder for Sunridge Heights is thicker than the others. It contains not just the standard documents but also all the evidence from the Brenda Patterson case. The fraudulent letters, the meeting minutes, the bank statements, David's legal correspondence, police reports, And finally, the court documents showing her conviction and sentencing. I keep all of it not because I am dwelling on the past, but as a reminder. A reminder that evil often comes in mundane forms, like a suburban HOA president in a cream-colored blazer. A reminder that standing up for what is right is worth the effort. And a reminder that communities work best when people pay attention and hold their leaders accountable. Marcus and Rebecca sent me a Christmas card last month from their new home. The card showed them standing in front of a house with a big red bow on the door. Inside they had written, "Thank you for everything. We learned so much from you about standing up for ourselves. Our new house is perfect, and we made sure to check the HOA very carefully before buying." That message made me smile. Maybe that is the real legacy of the whole situation. Not the criminal conviction or the reformed HOA, but the idea that people learn to protect themselves and to demand accountability from those in power. I hope anyone reading this who finds themselves in a similar situation will feel empowered to take action. You do not have to be a lawyer or an expert to recognize when something is wrong. You just have to be willing to ask questions, to demand answers, and to persist even when people try to dismiss or intimidate you. And if you are a board member of an HOA, I hope you will take this story as a cautionary tale. The power you hold is real, and the temptation to abuse it is always present. Do the right thing, follow the rules, and remember that you are serving your community, not ruling over it. The sun is setting now over the Scottsdale Mountains, painting the sky in those brilliant oranges and purples that make Arizona famous. Somewhere in Sunridge Heights, my tenants are probably making dinner, watching television, living their lives in peace. The HOA board is functioning properly, maintaining the community without drama or corruption. And Brenda Patterson, wherever she is, hopefully learned that shortcuts and schemes always catch up with you eventually. Justice might be slow sometimes, but it is relentless. My phone buzzes with a text from Sandra. "Pool party this Saturday, you should come. Bring guacamole if you can." I text back, "I will be there." Because that is what community is supposed to be about. Not fees and rules and power struggles, but people gathering together, sharing food, watching the kids play, and knowing that when problems arise, they will be handled fairly and transparently by leaders who remember they are servants, not masters. That is the community Sunridge Heights has become, and it is the community every HOA should strive to be. It took a scandal to get there, but sometimes that is what it takes to shock a system into working the way it should. As I close my laptop and prepare to call it a day, I feel grateful. Grateful that Marcus trusted me enough to forward that letter instead of just paying it. Grateful for David's expertise and Greg Rodriguez's integrity. Grateful for a legal system that, despite its flaws, eventually delivered justice. And grateful for the opportunity to turn a negative experience into something positive, into lessons learned and systems improved. Tomorrow, I will get back to the regular business of being a landlord, reviewing maintenance requests, processing rent payments, maybe looking at new investment properties. But tonight, I will remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply pay attention and speak up when something is not right. The story of how I found the HOA collecting fees from my tenants without authorization is over, but the lessons continue. Stay vigilant, demand accountability, keep good records, and never underestimate the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. Those principles served me well throughout this ordeal, and they will serve anyone else who finds themselves facing similar challenges. Sometimes being a property owner means more than just collecting rent and fixing broken appliances. Sometimes it means being a protector, an advocate, and a champion for people who are counting on you to have their back. I would not want to go through that experience again, but I am glad I went through it once. It made me better at what I do and more aware of the responsibilities that come with property ownership. And most importantly, it reminded me that ordinary people can make a difference when they decide that enough is enough and choose to take a stand.